So my name is Laure, and I work with Nick at eBay, the online marketplace. How many of you have sold or bought on eBay before? Right. Right, so I don't think I need to introduce the company to you. So I basically lead the part of the business which is about consumer selling for Europe, and Nick runs the data analytics team. Now, I want to rebuke a few myths. His team doesn't live in a dark corner. They actually live on the best floor, and they have the best view of the River Thames. We also sit on the same floor, so we speak to each other on a daily basis. Starting with our buyers. So, I mean, there is big traffic on eBay. So on a monthly basis, we have 150 unique visitors coming to the sites globally. And that equates to roughly 3 million items bought on a daily basis. So really, really huge traffic. And selection comes from a very wide range of items. So we have 50,000 categories. And they are delivered by 25 million sellers. And those sellers come in all shapes and sizes. They can be the people like you and me, so selling from their kitchen, the second-hand iPhone because they've decided to upgrade to the new one, to the entrepreneurs coming, basically selling from their warehouses, to the online merchants. And there we can talk about very large sellers. So some sellers do sell millions and millions of pounds or dollars or euros on an annual basis on the eBay platforms, not just in one country, but actually sometimes globally. And they do that in a number of ways. So you can buy on eBay fixed price, new items, but you can also buy auctions. So, so basically that creates a number of transactions that we capture on the platform. Now I'm going to hand over to Nick, who's going to talk about the impact in terms of data that eBay stores.
And what type of data do we do? So as you can tell, we've got some very big numbers. So the first thing is, of the 150 million unique visitors, we track every session. Of the 3 million items bought daily, we track every transaction, the checkout of that transaction, and the details of that transaction. Of 50,000 categories, we have all the inventory live in every single one of those categories in all 13 sites and 11 European countries, with every buying and selling country globally accessing those. Of our 25 million plus sellers, we track everything they've done historically, everything they do in terms of their listing behaviors, everything they do in terms of how they interact with the site and their APIs, as well as all the kind of seller metadata about the tools they interact with us with. Of 200, which I think is now 300 million plus live listings at any given time, we archive all of them. We archive the contents, we archive the metadata, we archive the pictures. So we have a reasonably large amount of data. We also track, when we're looking at our site metrics, we will track every search that takes place. We will track the results that were shown for that search. We will map the listings that go to that search. We'll even track which pictures showed up on the page that showed the results of the search when you typed in fake Chanel handbag. In terms of product metrics, we also have a lot of external data. So anything that can be classified as a homogeneous product or a catalogable product, we will have catalogs. Again, those catalogs are in around somewhere between 10 to 20 languages, again, spread across European, American, and Asian sites. We will also track a few custom metrics. We will track buying activity, selling activity, interactions with the site, things you look at, historical searches. So we've got quite a bit of data. It doesn't fit on a thumb drive, although we did try. So what do we store on? We have kind of two deployments. We have a Teradata enterprise data warehouse, which stores about 6.5 petabytes, so basically like that kind of number. We have a high-capacity Teradata system, which stores around 40 petabytes of data. We also have about a 9 to 10 petabyte Hadoop cluster. And for those of you who really like big numbers, our largest single table is 1 trillion rows of name value pairs. So obviously, manipulating a lot of this isn't particularly trivial. I'm going to hand back to Laure now. He's going to give you a bit of flavor around some of the challenges we face, and then I think we're going to dive into an example of how we tried to solve it by getting a little bit creative, a little bit analytical, and embracing some marketing.
So, I mean, if we look at e-commerce growth, I mean, if I take the example of the UK, it's still at 11%. And eBay is actually beating that number. So we are growing at 2-digit growth numbers still. And so we need to do that in a very sustainable way. So it's not just about growth. We need to make sure that we grow, but at the same time provide great customer experiences to our customers. And the definition of great has changed, well, is constantly changing. So 5 years ago, it might have meant, well, I'm just going to receive my item, but it might take 5 days. I don't really care. You know, it's online. Today, it's completely different. Customers expect to have their delivery the next day, or perhaps at worst, 48 hours later. They want very cheap delivery, or even better, free delivery. And they want to be fully protected, so they want to make sure that if something goes wrong, if they want to return the item, there isn't going to be any squibble. They can return the item or and get their reimbursement, no matter what happens. It means that eBay has to constantly adapt and constantly encourage sellers trading on the platform to provide those better standards of customer experience. So the big word is change. So we encourage customers basically to provide always better customer experiences to their customers, and that means that we have to adapt the platform, we have to adapt the rules and the policies on a constant basis. So when I joined the business over 3 years ago, 2009, eBay was making those changes constantly. In fact, every couple of weeks, we would basically ship a product change. Now, you can imagine that for the person like you and me, it doesn't really make a difference, right? You sell occasionally on eBay, yeah, there's a different rule for shipping, well, that's fine. But for people who have thousands, tens of thousands of listings, that is a problem because each time that eBay makes change, they have to go and update their listings. 2009, the satisfaction levels of those customers, the merchants selling on eBay, and we have around 1 million of those, were actually rock bottom. So we had to do something. When we did the changes as well, we provided very limited notice. And we didn't tell proactively those people that, hey, there's a change. They had to come and check the eBay boards on a daily basis to find out what eBay had dreamt the night before. We had to radically change the model, starting really from the customer. So what we started to do is really to bundle all of those changes into 2 or 3 major product releases per year. And so that meant not just making a change on the marketing side and how we engage with customers, but also throughout the organization, the product delivery, the planning. So basically the whole life cycle of product development had to be changed. We also decided to give sellers 2 months notice so that they could assess the changes and adapt to the changes before they took place. And then we also changed the way we engage with them, but proactively telling them of the changes in advance. So that made a huge difference to satisfaction levels, but also to loyalty. A few of those sellers did churn as a result. However, it was still not enough. It was still global engagement with the sellers. And so what we wanted to do is really push the envelope and go the extra mile in terms of engaging with the sellers. So the third part really is building on what we've got today, is really about engaging with customers on almost like individual basis, leveraging the data. So we know what items, what products to sell. We know in which category. We have a wealth of information, and the idea is really to engage with them on a one-on-one basis to tell them exactly what changes are relevant for them and what they should do. So it's all about really targeted communications and targeted support in order to make them basically adapt more easily and more quickly on the platform. So I'm now going to hand over to Nick, who's going to take you through the mechanics.
So we're in quite a position. We've been hiding a lot of changes, and all we do is twice a year we tell people who have got multi-million-dollar businesses they need to change 25 things almost immediately. So this creates a reasonable degree of friction, and the paradox being that e-commerce evolves at a certain speed, and to keep pace with e-commerce and continue growing as a company, we have to be able to deliver these changes, and if we deliver these changes, it means our sellers have to be able to deliver them. Equally, from our sellers' perspective, if we force huge quantities of operational change and we reduce the amount of operational change down to what they can manage, then we're going to fall behind as an overall platform. So the challenge really for us as a team was to try and understand how we can understand our sellers' needs better and reduce a lot of the friction from the change process. And the major objective we went after was we have absolutely no idea how painful it can be to create change for our sellers. And this was the real, we set out to solve a problem and started then digging into the data. And the challenge we had is we would have a few sellers when we would talk very kind of qualitatively, we'd talk to them, and some of them would kind of, shrug and maybe walk out of the room with a slight frown. Others would be very vocal about the things that we were doing to them and their business, and it was a very personal relationship for them. So when we've got 1 million sellers who will have a personal relationship with us, we have to find a way to have a personal relationship back with them. So the first bit we did was we started looking at what data we had and what could we start looking at to try and delve into this and get under the skin for all of our sellers. And there's 3 pieces we kind of took and pulled out. And the first bit was, as I said, we captured data about every single listing. Now, the listings are what our sellers create, and they're one of the major pain points in that when you create a change, you either have to change something you're doing operationally at the level of the seller or the business, or it's at a kind of a listing level. It's the other main interaction that our sellers have with us as a site. It's their supply, it's their stock, it's their window onto the world. So we started looking at a lot of those pieces of data. The second piece, I've called project metadata here. When we roll each of these changes into a big release, there's anywhere between 20 to 40 to sometimes 60 at the stage of initial planning, potential changes we're considering. Each of those changes can affect one of these listings or a seller in what we bucketed down and limited down from about 10,000 possibles to 30 or 40 different ways it can impact that listing. We then looked at also a variety of what I'm going to call transactional data here. And this isn't just financial transactional data, although that's in there because we want to quantify the value of change. And there are 2 ways we cause pain for ourselves. One is we cause them to take effort. The other one is that we actually damage their business in the process of forcing these changes through. So we pulled those 3 pieces together. And then what we created was kind of 3 output sets of data. The first one is a kind of a seller-level piece of project data. And it meant that we could see every seller and every project and what the impact of that project would be on that seller. And we did this in a variety in terms of what was the impact on the listings, and then we can start to add things onto that to understand what might the costs be, what might the benefits be. We then started building out a model of what do we think is the cost of making changes. You get a stopwatch, you try and not edit one of our listings, and then you hit the end on the stopwatch. When you get the hang of it, you can get that down to a few seconds. And there are also ways of kind of automating that process. And we also started to flag the different types of changes we had. We had changes which would affect a seller's operations. We had changes that would affect small parts of the listing. We would have changes which would affect both. We could have some that had to be done listing by listing. We had some that could be done entirely across the board in a very quick and automated way. And we had to work around what was the awareness of the seller going to be, what was the understanding of what they needed to do, and how long was it going to take them to do it. What was great there was we could then take parts of this data and start feeding that back to Laure in the business so that when you start planning changes, you could actually click a few buttons and start to understand that this change would have a massive impact on sellers. Maybe you wanted to reconsider the scope or the breadth or how aggressive it was going to be. The main output we can get from here, obviously, is a nice segmentation. Well, it's great that we've managed to harness the data. We can get it in. We can understand who are going to be deeply impacted sellers. And we can start to build segments around them to start to tailor communication. What we could then start saying was, well, if we know the impact of the changes on the seller, we have a guess of what the costs are, we can actually start to understand exactly what is the most important initiative or change for every seller. We can rank order them, and we can give them an idea of this one's going to hurt you a lot. These others are less important. Focus your priority here. And what it meant was we could start to then personalize the communication, and it was different for every seller, because all their businesses are completely different. The guy selling antique clocks, the guy selling sofas, and the guy selling DVD players have very different businesses, both operationally and financially. And then the final piece that we've started to pull out is once we know what the changes are, we know the impact of them, we can prioritize them, and we know what needs doing, really, we should just start doing that. So what we now have is we've created something which moved from a segmentation through to personalization, but is now actually a service. It's now a hit list of, here's what you need to go and do. And we were experimenting with how granular we need to be. Do we do that on a literally pick up your mouse, move it to here? Or do we just start saying, here's tools that can help you. Here are people that can help you. And there are other parts where we're looking to say, actually, we can help you, and we're going to get on with it. So we've managed to take what started out as solving a problem with a relatively large amount of data, but driving that through and turn what was a basic segmentation problem into something we can actually now deliver as a service.
So, and in terms of business results, I mean, we've had some great results. So in terms of awareness of the changes through personalization, it's now above 90%. We've got great results as well on open rates of emails that we send to sellers. It's over 50% improvement. Also, the cost of making those changes for sellers is much lower because now they can plan for it. And there's better compliance as well in terms of making those changes in time. And I would say that the best indicator for us beyond the financials is obviously the satisfaction levels, which have improved tremendously since we are doing that. So it's still a challenge. We still need to continue the personalization even forward, because we will continue to evolve the platform so that it can remain competitive.